Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of DSC's podcast, Charity Questions, where we get professionals from around the sector and we ask them the questions that you need to hear today. And really nice to have with us today Robert Foster from Red Ochre, and he's talking to us today about impact measurement. And personally, I've done a lot of my impact measurement training with Rob a few years ago now, and still use a lot of that to this day. So we're here to learn all about what charities can do to measure the impacts they're making, and also what that benefit of that is. And if you are not doing this already, which some charities might not be, how to start kind of doing that. And of course, if you are doing this, which most of us are, how we can take that to another level. So welcome, Rob. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, George. How you doing?
Cool. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you very much. So do you want to tell us maybe a little bit about your background, how you ended up in this position as an expert or professional on impact measurement in the charity sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a principal of Red Ochre. We're a leading social enterprise consultancy. And I am particularly interested in how organizations create value, how they quantify value, and how they share that value with wider stakeholder groups. I'm doing this for quite a while now, long before impact measurement and impact management were trendy.
Yeah.
Back when it was called monitoring evaluation, everyone was complaining about, I've got to report on this output for this funder, and it was a chore. It's really good to see over the last maybe 10, 15 years, the way the perception of impact has changed slightly from being a necessary evil to actually, this might be something that if we're good at it, it can help us get better. So that's kind of my story.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think some people would argue it maybe still feels like a chore, but absolutely. How do we
A
get
lot of people would.
Yeah. How do we get to the point where we're informing maybe future projects, our organization, fellow organizations? I love that. So you're teaching this now. You teach a lot of charities across the UK and probably abroad, I'm sure, as well. Impact measurement. When did you start training this kind of stuff?
Oh, crikey. We did this, or I started training probably maybe 10, 12 years ago, maybe even more. At Red Oak, we only deliver training on topics that where we have practical experience of, that we've
Yeah.
got knowledge of. And so I've been actually doing things like social return investment, kind of impact mapping, theory of change type work for, I don't know, more than 15 years. Actually, I was reminded by one of my colleagues that we were 21 years old last week. So I've probably been doing it for almost 20 years, I should think.
Wow.
And so about 5 years after getting my experience, I began to be approached by people say, could you help us do this ourselves? So that's probably when I started training.
Nice. I love that. And so maybe we've got some charities out there that potentially aren't doing this and maybe not necessarily reluctant. They don't have the time. They don't have the resources. If you were talking to a charity about measuring impact and they were doing this for the first time, what would you say to kind of help them understand the importance of doing it?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Because trying to encapsulate everything here, aren't you? The value of social impact. Well, I'm going to start kind of philosophically, and I'm going to become a little bit more practical. So, philosophically, I'm glad that you're accommodating. So, philosophically, I think impact measurement can help you kind of understand and kind of answer some fundamental questions. As a charity or a social enterprise or a community organization, we're involved in kind of delivering positive social change to people, which, by the way, is a really pithy definition for social impact, the positive change we want to see.
Yeah.
So we often struggle with how do we know that we're delivering that positive change? So social impact measurement, getting the information to help you get some answers, will help you answer that fundamental question. How do I know? How do I know I'm contributing positive change? How do I know I'm helping society? How do I know that I'm delivering value to the people that I'm interested in helping? So that's kind of the jumping on point.
Absolutely.
From a practical perspective, I think impact measurement can help with two or three things. So the first is if you're focused on helping your beneficiaries and measuring the change in your beneficiaries, that helps focus your attention strategically. So it helps map back from activities through to strategy and everything in between.
Yeah.
So it helps prevent horrible word. I'm going to drop the S bomb. Strategic drift here. Another
Strategic
thing.
drift, love it. Okay, yeah.
Another or two other things that I think it really helps with practically is it can help prove the benefit to external stakeholders of what you do. So that's to funders, that's to the press, that's to social media, and we all know how important social media is now.
Of course.
To policymakers, to beneficiaries, to trustees. So that's really important, being able to prove the benefit of what you have done and what you might be able to do in the future. So that's incredibly important. So that kind of overlaps into things like fundraising, crowdfunding, branding, recruitment. All of these things kind of begin to mesh together with social impact here. And also internally, impact measurement and also impact management can help you use your limited resources so you can more effectively deliver greater value to your beneficiary group. So this is about things like internal efficiencies, project management, risk, internal change management, all of those kind of, I'm going to say kind of boring or common or garden kind of business functions that if you don't get that right, someone else is going to do it better and will be able to outcompete you. They'll just be better at delivering positive change. So that's, I think, probably the three main practical benefits.
Nice.
So hopefully that's answered the question.
No, definitely, and it's a great understanding of kind of where you start on this journey. I think you talk about it exactly the same way we do at DSC. It's about the beneficiaries, isn't it? And somebody once said to me, "Nothing about them without them," and I love that. And this is part of that, isn't it? So I'm going to ask you for an example. Do you have an example for us where maybe you've worked with an organization, or maybe you've spoken to an organization and they've gone and implemented measuring impact or improved their impact measuring, and it's had a kind of dramatic impact on their performance?
Oh, yeah, actually, that's a really good question.
On the
Rather
spot.
than give you, a bit on the spot, rather than give you one example, maybe give you two examples to kind of illustrate a couple of different points or perspectives. So I'll start with an arts project based out in West London, as is typical of many, not only arts projects, but social and civil society type projects. They had multiple funders. You have multiple funders. The general story is you end up having to do monitoring evaluation reports to lots and lots of people all of the time, whether it's monthly, quarterly, biannually, annually. So, if you've got 20 funders, oh my lord, you're going to have a huge management overhead. So what we did was we worked with them to try and identify, was there commonality in some of the indicators that were being used? I'm going to kind of just put a little footnote here. Indicators. A lot of people get caught up on the word indicator because they think an indicator proves something is happening. It's not actually true. It's called an indicator, and here's a massive caveat here. An indicator is called an indicator because it indicates something may be happening. It doesn't prove anything. Okay, so normally when we're thinking about indicators, we have a range of indicators. So there'll be kind of quantitative, qualitative, maybe financial indicators, and you will use two or three of those indicators together to give slightly more robust evidence base that the positive change you want to see is actually happening. So, bearing in mind that context, we worked with them to identify some commonality in all of the reporting to the plethora of funders that they had. And they were kind of a mixture of local funders, national funders, regional funders, and also kind of specific funders. So some would be about performance, some would be about kind of screen art, some would be about performance art and dance, that kind of thing. So there's a whole range of different funders with all slightly different perspectives, but actually at the core, it's about using art to help people live the life they want to lead. So we worked with them to identify kind of almost a key indicators dashboard. And over time, they were able to do two or three things. So one is they began to measure those core indicators, whether they were funded to do so or not. So this actually gave them a huge data set, a really robust, what we call a longitudinal data set. So that's evidence over a long period of time about the type of change that they want to bring about in their beneficiary group. And so if it's a really robust long-term data set, it's very difficult for anyone to argue the toss with you. It's like, okay, well, you've actually got some proof there. Yeah, okay, I stand back. You're the expert in the room. So that's one of the really big benefits. Another benefit is because they were measuring the same indicators, or there's probably about 6, probably 7 indicators that were core to everything. The efficiency of measuring those indicators was increased. So the management overhead, the reporting overhead decreased. So they actually had more free internal resource to be able to deliver that positive social change. So it was the equivalent of getting like an extra 5% grant funding, because they actually had that 5% internal efficiency saving. So that's another interesting thing to think about. If you save money and you get more internally efficient, that means you don't have to go out and ask for more money. So that was a really interesting thing that they did. There is a bit of a caveat here. It wasn't all plain sailing, rather. Easy for me to say. The interesting thing was that the vast majority of new funders that hadn't engaged with the organisation before, when they had their inset meetings and beginning to talk about how we're going to measure the benefit of what you're doing, they were so well. We measured this core indicator bank, and we have done for years. We'd like to continue to measure based on this indicator dashboard. Are there any additional things you want to add on to it, or is this fine? And almost all of the new funders were happy to go, actually, that ticks most of our boxes. So we might have 1, possibly 2 additional indicators they asked for, but actually they were happy with that. So that was really great. So as the transition into a more efficient and leaner reporting mechanism moving forward, that was really great. Where the pinch point was managing the relationship with the existing funders to say, well, this is what we're trying to do. Are you willing over the next 2 or 3 years toward the end of this funding cycle to either use our proposed indicator dashboard, or do we have to continue to do the reporting as you have currently specified that we do? And so that was a little bit of a pinch point, and it was I'm not going to lie, that bit wasn't easy, but it was definitely worthwhile the investment.
And so maybe we're thinking of the funders now. So that was a conversation with the funders. They had a kind of prescribed layout for you to do it, and then you've kind of gone, actually, this is limiting what we can do in terms of our measurement. Yeah, and the funder had a positive reaction to this in the end, potentially get them through the change curve kind of thing.
The vast majority of funders did, probably 70-80% or more were fine, were very flexible, because remember, a funder, they are your friend. They're not scary. They're having a conversation with a charity or social enterprise because they like what you're doing. They think you are adding value to society, to the environment, to the world, and they want to do a similar thing. They can't do it themselves directly. You can. So it's in their best interest to be able to have a meaningful conversation with you. And I think one of the really interesting things about this conversation was this arts project. We're able to go back and say, if you say, yes, this is a way forward and you're happy to adopt this kind of indicator dashboard, 1, you get access to a longitudinal data set, and 2, we are already more efficient as a result of doing this. It's an increase in efficiency and an increase in robustness of evidence. So there were kind of 2 benefits to this, really.
And are you keeping this information, just kind of a technical question, in like SharePoint, Google Sheets? How are you sharing this with the funders?
That depends, actually.
Different ways, I'm sure. Yeah.
There's a basically every funder wants their own. So sometimes it will be sent to them directly. Sometimes it'll be shared through kind of a common third party thing, like G Drive or something like that. Sometimes it will be through a third party app where, or a platform where you capture data. So it depends. As long as it's captured, and generally, as long as it's the format it's in is an open format, something like a CSV file or an HTML file or something, so you can export it, and or even a PDF. Then that's fine for most purposes. We are getting towards this kind of the convergent technology, the singularity.
Slowly.
If evidence and data is out there, someone will get it.
Absolutely.
You'll be able to share it.
So we kind of got you. Go on. What
I was going to say, no, that was the first example. You've
Of
got me
course.
all excited. I get all keyed up and say, "Oh, I want to show you something else now." So there's another example of a project that we worked on where impact measurement really changed the way the organisation, the project was delivered. So I thought, that might be interesting to
Definitely.
to
Let's
share
share
with you.
that,
So
please.
it's less. The last example was really about increasing internal efficiencies and increasing the robustness of data. This one is slightly different. It's an entrepreneurial support project that was based in, and I'm not going to mention the name, but if I say a South London outdoor market,
Cool.
you probably, oh
I'm
yeah, I can
thinking of
probably,
some. Yeah.
yeah. um, so this was a project designed to support existing market traders and also kind of emergent traders, so people that were interested in kind of trying out entrepreneurial activity but didn't want to kind of either set up a business or hire a shop, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to try it out. So the original project specification was to have a variety of skills transfer, things like all day training, kind of test trading, and support around finance, all these kind of things, all of which is completely logical. But after the first 2 or 3 sessions were run, there was almost no turn up to the all day training sessions.
Mm.
So this is the first thing. So the data capture, the number of people that were turning up was very low. So that kind of indicated something was happening. So
Mhm.
the next step from impact measurement is impact management, going out and trying to figure out trying to gain insight. What's the data telling us, and why is this thing happening, and what can we change? That's the management bit. So we talked to quite a few of as many of the beneficiaries as we possibly could, and it turns out, and as soon as someone says this to you, it's absolutely logical, and you just kind of slap your head. Why didn't we think of that? If you are a market trader and there's training all day from 8 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock, that means you can't be on your market stall, which means you can't
Absolutely.
earn money.
Yep.
So I'm not going to turn up. I'm going to make money.
Of course.
So as a result of this, we went back to the originator of the entrepreneurial support program and said, this is the problem. People aren't turning up. This is the reason, because they
Nice.
are losing their ability to earn money. We suggest these changes. So this is
Nice.
the management bit,
Hmm.
which is maybe early morning sessions, kind of bite-sized training sessions at lunchtime, very local to
Mm.
them, and
Hmm.
then evening or weekend sessions. So we adapted and lowered the barriers to accessibility for the training and skills transfer. So I think this illustrates a few really interesting things. So impact measurement um, is only useful in as much as it gives us data, which then helps us gain insight and then make changes. So impact measurement, impact management is where you go to the next level. So
Mm.
gaining something from the insight and then doing a change, making your organization better. That's one thing. The next thing this indicates, or suggests rather, is impact measurement overlaps so many other disciplines within a charity. So things like project management, resource management, scheduling, recruitment, all of these kinds of activities you think are separate are actually not that separate. They
Mm.
exist almost like, if you had a Venn diagram of these kind of business functions, there would be like a pretty flower in front of you.
Yeah.
And right at the center would be social impact measurement.
So I like, yeah, you're introducing that kind of impact management as well, which makes a lot of sense to me. But the words itself was actually maybe a reminder back to the course. And you're absolutely right. We can measure, but it's about the management of that. So
Mm.
we kind of. I always feel like when I'm teaching project management that I'm yearning to put objective data in there and like attendee numbers and stuff, and that can feel
Mm.
great. But we know that the reality is that it's a lot of social change comes from the subjectivity, right? The kind of awareness of mental health and things like that. So maybe if we're thinking of what a funder wants to see, if I'm somebody putting a bid together and I'm putting my impact measurement kind of in place and I'm thinking about the subjective and objective outcomes, what do you think a funder is going to want to see more of, objective or subjective targets?
That's an interesting question. Well, thinking about objective and subjective, I'll say that in my experience, many of the practitioners I come across get caught up in this. It's almost a pseudo argument. So, what's
Mm.
better? is it objective, subjective, relative, or is it quantitative, absolute? So actually, they're both parts of the same story.
Yeah.
So that's the very first thing. So that both are necessary, and I'll expand on that a little bit later. One thing I will suggest is from the perspective of a funder specifically, if you have, well, I suppose I'm going to take a step back now and just remind people, or just introduce for those that aren't familiar with objective and subjective. So objective, so this sometimes called quantitative, sometimes called absolute measures. So they're easy to count. They're typically outputs. So they're the things that immediately happen as a result of what you do.
Nice.
So normally it will be the number of training sessions, or the number of people that turn up, or the number of maybe letters that are downloaded from your website for someone to sign and then send off to their MP. So they're really relatively big numbers. They get big really quickly, and they're easy to count normally. If they're not easy to count, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's a kind of another footnote. So that's the very first thing. The next part of this discussion is about kind of subjective measures. So sometimes this is called qualitative.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's called relative. So it's about how you feel. So examples of this might be a change in your confidence, maybe an increase in your social network. So and that's another interesting example. An increase in the social network. There's two ways to kind of measure that. You could say, oh, I've got lots of people that I could talk with now, and I feel as though my social network's better, or my group of friends is better. That's one way of thinking about it. But you could also have kind of quantitative measures to answer that question as well. You could ask someone at the beginning of a project, how many people can you share a personal problem with? And it might be one. And then at the end of the project, how many people could you share a personal problem with? And it might be 4. So there's actually an increase in the number of people you could share a personal problem with, which is an indicator. It's a quantitative indicator that there has been a change in the social network. And the social network, how people feel they can engage with wider social groups, is definitely on the subject of the relative end. So there's a bit of a blur. So there's objective, subjective, and there's that kind of grey area in the middle where it could be one of two. Okay, so that's another an interesting thing to think about. A final, just to muddy the water a little bit more.
Let's do it.
There are also financial proxies, so financial measures. So and financial measures are quite interesting because they could relate to individuals, they could relate to economic systems, they could relate to family groups. So it could be measures about things like energy poverty. How much money do you have is spent on energy, heating your house, or feeding your children, or how much disposable income do you have as an individual? Or it could be an increase in the tax that you're contributing to the economic system of the country you're in, or the gross value added, so the additional kind of value of the enterprise that you've created. How much is that adding to HMRC, for instance, that kind of thing. So there's yet another series of measures. So it's not really just objective and subjective. There's also, 2 or 3 other kind of grey areas that you can play in. And this is the exciting bit. None of these is better than any others. They are all part of the mix.
Nice. Part of the what, sorry?
The mix.
Mix, gotcha.
Part of the narrative, part of your story, because these are just tools to help you tell your story better to the person that you're trying to engage with. And I've just realized that I haven't actually answered your question. What does the funder want? So we do lots of work with funders and impact investors. And one of them, from about 6 or 7 years ago, that we're very friendly with, said to me, it almost as an offhand comment, was that outputs, if I'll remind you, outputs are the objective measures. So the big numbers that don't tell you a great deal, they open the door because they prove you're helping lots of people. Okay, so that gets someone's attention. Oh, you're helping 20,000 people.
Mm,
I'm listening. And then once your application goes on someone's desk, it's the lives touched, it's the storytelling, it's the emotional hook that really drives home your point, that proves what you're doing has helped a person.
mm,
And so that's a really interesting thing. So the quantitative comes in later. That's kind of knockout blow. There's a famous apocryphal quote, and I can't remember who said it. It's probably no one said it because it's apocryphal. But a million deaths is a statistic, but one death is a tragedy.
mm,
So if you think about that, what can I do to get a big number to knock on a door, get someone to open the door,
mm.
and then I can have that emotional hook. I can kind of drive home my point, drive home my message. Yeah, that's the way to do it. A
Love
good
that.
one too.
Yeah. So it's almost we're building credibility, aren't we, with the big numbers, and then we're going, and
Mm.
here is this precise situation, which subjectively has changed this person's life, but it could also be objective as well in terms of how we measure that. Nice.
Absolutely, you're on the money. You actually summarise what I said much better than I did.
Yes, yes, I'll take that. I take that. No, this is definitely something that I'm passionate about and want to learn more of. Absolutely. So we've probably got a lot of organisations out there, and I will just say at this point, maybe you don't have to be beholden to funders as a charity listening to this, which is a really cool
Mhm.
position to be in. But this is the same sort of stuff that we do for our internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, anybody that has a kind of influence in the project. We can present all of this information in the same way, even if it's not
Mhm.
to a funder. We're just talking about funders because obviously a lot of us rely on funders to get to deliver our projects with us. So maybe just to kind of one of the last questions I'm thinking of is we're a small charity, we're running a few projects, and
Mhm.
maybe we are measuring some impact, potentially delegate numbers, feedback percentages, those sorts of things. But if you were going to kind of stand with that charity and maybe help them to see if there was anything else they could be doing, what sort of questions would you ask them, or what would you recommend they could do to
Mhm.
make sure their impact measurement was adequate?
That's a really interesting question. A very practical perspective as well. I like that. Um, Ideally, I would say have a plan before you start delivery.
Mm,
You know,
absolutely. Yeah.
unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. I mean, if I had a pound for every time I was called in to help an organisation, it was 3 years into a 5-year program to sort out their monitoring evaluation, I could take early retirement.
Yeah.
But okay, so failing being able to plan before starting. There's probably 3 or 4 things you could do. The first thing I would suggest is think about what's important for the organisation.
Hmm.
So you could do that intuitively. That I know this because I'm the founder, or
Yep.
it could be kind of intuitively or observed because we are a delivery organization and we engage on a day-to-day basis with the beneficiaries. We know this from experience and observation. Or it could be a little bit more formal. Maybe we've got a vision document, or maybe we've got charitable objects and our governing documentation, or maybe we've
Exactly.
got project objectives.
Yep.
So that's where I would start. So that's kind of the flag in the sand that everything drives towards. Everything you should be doing should be supporting your progress towards fulfilling that vision.
Mm,
That's the starting point. The next thing I would think about is I'll refer back to one of my earlier answers about kind of fundamental questions. How do I know? How do I know that I'm contributing to positive social change? How do I know I'm contributing to bringing about that vision, bringing about those charitable objects being discharged? And so, as part of that kind of question, how do I know? You think about how do I get the answer to that? So we think about data. So what kind of questions can I ask? What kind of data do I get? How do I capture the data? When do I capture the data? So this is a
mm,
little bit about indicators, sampling frequencies, sampling mechanisms, and sometimes we if we want to kind of raise awareness of a project, I don't know, maybe the benefit of eating fruit and veg
yeah.
on your long-term
Let's go
healthcare.
for it.
There's a million and one ways you could do that. So you might think, oh, I know lots of these already. So you could sort of say, well, I've seen other projects using these measures, and you could just adopt other people's measures. This is kind of a little bit a trick. It's called parametric learning. So parametric learning just means taking someone else's parameters, someone else's data, or what they're measuring, just using that. So a nice way of saying this is
Nice.
you're standing on the shoulders of giants.
You're copying
Yeah, that's
someone,
what.
and that's absolutely
You're
okay.
copying. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. You're
I
sharing
like
best
that.
practice.
I like that. The
Yes, that's one
parametric.
thing.
Parametric. What was the second word?
Parametric learning.
I like that. Yeah. Copying people who are doing it well.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one way of
I
doing
love
it.
that. Yeah.
The other way
Nice.
is what you already feel and know. We've measured this before and it's been fine. Let's do a little bit more.
Yep.
Sometimes if you're struggling though, or you want to kind of go to the next level, maybe you're going from project sizes of maybe £5,000, you want to go to maybe 20,000 or 50,000, you might need to be a little bit more formal. So
Nice.
there are a few tools that you might want to use. So there's things like the theory of change, which you've probably heard of, many of you have heard of. Really simply, there's a problem, there's activity, you do stuff, and then the stuff you do contributes to lessening the problem, so it contributes to the solution. So problem, activity, solution.
Nice.
You can make it as complicated as you want, but that's the nub of it. Then there's things like visual storyboard, which is a mechanism that involves co-design to flesh out the theory of change. So you work with your beneficiaries, workers, trustees, potentially funders, other organizations doing similar things. And so that's a kind of a next step beyond theory of change. And there are some really pithy ones, pithy tools, things like look back and move forward, which is a real favorite. And I've used that with um, gangs in conflict with each other in urban environments, all the way through to international human rights lawyers.
Wow.
And everything in between. So there's a range of immensely flexible tools that are available to you. And so that's what I would do. If you're thinking or struggling about what data do I capture, have a think a little bit more formally and look at what other people, other organizations similar to you are doing. So a great thing to do would be to look at maybe Social Value International,
Yeah.
those kinds of organizations, that they'll normally have a variety of impact reports in a repository. Look for the
Love that.
organizations that are similar to you and see what they're reporting on, what kind of measures are they using. So when in doubt, look at other people's work.
That's such a good tip. So that's Social Value International. People could just Google
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah. And there's a million and one others as well.
Yeah, no, that's a really great tip there, I think. So to kind of summarize, Robert, I think we're about building credibility, right? And about showing people the impact of what we've done. Is there anything else you wanted to share before we kind of sign off?
Um, maybe a couple of other things that I would suggest is give yourself permission to pause and reflect. So and once more, I'm going to take a step back and be a bit philosophical. Within the sector, I've noticed that, and I'm sure many of us have noticed this particular kind of structural issue with the sector, is we do a huge amount of work and we do it very, very well, but with incredibly limited resources. So we tend to be spread really thin. So we go from planning to doing to reporting to planning to doing reporting, trying to fundraise the whole time. It's very rare that we take a moment to kind of pause and reflect and say, what's the data telling us? What can we do better? Can we change the way we communicate with funders? Can we change the way we engage with beneficiaries? Can we change the way we deliver activities using our limited resources to be more efficient? So the two big takeaways I would suggest would be pause and reflect, gain insight, and do something interesting with it.
Love that. Yeah, you're absolutely right to reiterate the kind of pause there, and I think we all see it, don't we, in each other. And I speak to somebody, and they're like, "Oh, by the way, I'm also now doing this as well," and that's very common, isn't it? But yeah, we find kind of peace in that pause, and we will save time eventually as well. Actually, if we do this, when we step
Absolutely,
away,
it's a massive investment. 15 minutes every day to think about things will pay massive dividends, especially if you're in a management or in a leadership role, or you're thinking about transitioning into a leadership role. Gaining insight is incredibly important.
Nice. Okay. So yeah, Robert and his colleague Uday are a couple of trainers for us at DSC, and have been doing. They train all of this stuff for DSC and outside of DSC through Red Ochre as well. Do you want to let people know how to kind of get in touch with you, Robert, if they have any questions, how they can reach out to you?
Absolutely. The simplest way is just drop me an email at robert@redochre.org.uk. That's REDOCHRE.org.uk. Or just look me up on LinkedIn. I'm in there. There's a rather cheesy picture of me looking like that with a kind of a suit on, all that kind of stuff. But some people expect that kind of.
You have to be watching the video to benefit from that pose then that Robert just did. That's amazing. So yeah, I definitely recommend linking in with Robert, and if you do have any questions, go to him, come to me, and we can talk about this, or come and attend some of the amazing training that Rob does through DSC or directly with Red Ochre. And just want to thank you for coming on and sharing your impact measurement journey with us. And actually, it was a reminder for me, and I think you're absolutely right to say we measure, then we manage that, but also we step away and we think about where we're at. And I think probably for a challenge you might say, you might agree with Robert, is that sometimes we join organizations as mentors, and we don't have the knowledge that is so important to do this actually. And it's about kind of facilitating people to kind of understand their organization in a slightly different way, rather than us actually telling people what to do, which is kind of what I found anyway. So I hope people feel empowered from this and go away and maybe take your impact measurement to another level. Anything else, Robert? Sad.
No, I think we've covered everything.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us on DSC's Charity Questions podcast. You're a great guest, and thank you for being here today.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot. See you soon, George.
Bye. Thank you for watching Charity Questions by the Directory of Social Change. So this is the podcast where we bring charity experts to you and we ask them the questions that you provide us via social media. So if you want to get involved, please check out the Directory of Social Change on Instagram, Twitter or LinkedIn. And of course, to hear more about this content and to learn more about Charity Questions, subscribe to our YouTube channel now, and of course, like this video to let us know if you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. Cheers.